He signed a DNR behind my back while I was in ICU. I survived and revised the will that same night. The look on their faces when the lawyer read it was better than any medicine. I cannot tell you how long I had been unconscious, drifting in that cold haze of tubes, monitors, and endless white walls. One moment the world had gone dark and quiet. The next a harsh antiseptic scent hit my nostrils, and I felt the steady hiss of the ventilator, like a heartbeat of machinery keeping me afloat. Pale fluorescent lights cut through the slats of the window blinds, casting thin stripes of light that danced like phantoms across my face. My ears buzzed, as though the hospital itself were holding its breath. When a voice broke the silence, it sounded like ice cracking. "Let's just sign the DNR already. The insurance payout is more useful than her being a vegetable," said Allie, like delivering an order over her morning coffee. Her voice didn't quiver. It was shockingly calm, clinical, just as cold as the room around me. My heart tried to hammer into awareness. Was that Allie? My little girl who once needed me for scraped knees and bedtime stories? Was that really her voice? Then Travis's tone cut through. "We can't keep draining the family savings. That money can pay off my mortgage. Mortgage, savings, money." My breath hitched. I'd given them my life, my blood, my salary, my last nerve, to give those two every advantage they ever needed, and now? It didn't matter. Not to them. Before we continue, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, hit that hypa button. Not out of anger, but to remind the world, we were here. Everything went silent, except the ventilator's steady hiss. My eyes refused to open. My ears, though, they were painfully alert. Micah's voice trembled, breaking into the financial calculus of betrayal like a candle in a storm. "Please, she's still breathing. She's not gone yet. Give her a chance." Allie scoffed. "Micah, grow up. You're always the soft one. It's pathetic." A sudden smack echoed. It wasn't loud, but enough. I felt her hand hard and cruel against Micah's cheek. The sound of flesh hitting flesh was muffled, sickening. Micah's head jerked back. I could hear the air leaving his lungs. His body curled tightly, like a wounded bird since he couldn't speak. I opened one eye. His face was already swelling, dark purple racing across his cheek. He pressed a trembling hand to it, fighting tears. I recognized the look. Innocence smashed under force. Allie turned away, her nails clicking against a stack of clipboard papers. Travis held his breath, eyes wide as though he'd just hit the one person who never left his side. I blinked. I was alive. Every breath pained me, but as blurry, hazy consciousness sharpened, so did my recognition of the truth. No longer their mother, not to them. I had died for them long ago. Except for Micah. He leapt between me and the abyss. That guilt-searing love in his eyes, that was everything I needed to hold on to. Pain bloomed behind my ribs, but I squeezed my eyelids together. I summoned my voice, and it came in a crackle. "Micah." He looked up. His eyes were wet but defiant. He managed a nod. Allie narrowed her eyes at the sound of my voice, but her shoulders slumped. Travis, too, seemed underwater with shock. The room was shocked silent, except for the machine's undying hiss. I lay there, every nerve screaming, yet a spark flickered. They believed I was gone. They believed they had made peace. But I was not done. Not yet. That moment, when betrayal echoed louder than machines, I realized survival was not a debt to be paid, it was defiance. Every ragged breath wasn't just for me, it was a testament that love can bruise, but also ignite. I calmed my breathing. Warmth filled my throat. "They do not deserve me," I whispered to myself, though Allie heard. She gasped and looked away. Travis clenched his jaw. A slow confidence bloomed in me. I may have been broken, but each breath affirmed one thing. I have one chance left, and I will not waste it. I remembered the day I sold my wedding rings to pay for Allie's tuition. The rings were tarnished, hardly worth the metal they were made from, but they were all I possessed, of the man I lost and the vows we shared. I walked down lopsided cobblestones to the pawn shop, the evening air heavy with dread. I sat on an uncomfortable stool while the clerk weighed them, his eyes clinking coldly with calculations of cash to hand me. No sentiment for the meaning behind the rings. I watched him exchange the precious gold for bills that smelled of rubber and ink. The moment he placed that stack in my hand, I felt my marriage vanish, not in war or in death, but in the silent dismissal of an institution everyone expected me to cherish. That night, I folded the bills into Allie's dorm mailbox. I pressed my lips to the envelope, as though to seal my love in ink. But the note I dared to write, the one that simply said, "I believe in you," was smudged by my tears. When Allie opened it, I waited for gratitude. Instead, I received disdain. "You are so domineering, Mother, like some relic of the 1950s, she said, her eyes never meeting mine. Domineering. That word wounded more than any blade. I was a mother, yes, but in her eyes I was a fossil. And then there was Travis. Ever the reckless risk-taker, I found him one bitter cold night outside the courthouse, cuffed and hollow-faced. I signed the bail papers with shaking hands. I promised the judge I would be responsible for him. I took out loans I could barely afford to save his skin. And what did he say the first morning he crossed our threshold again? "You're such a moral obstacle, Mother." I stood in that hallway, hearing the slam of the front door behind him, understanding that my love meant nothing if it stood in the way of his convenience. Micah, my soft little Micah, with his gentle smiles and fears of thunderstorms. He always drew quietly in the corner, sketching worlds only he could see. When I praised one of his humble drawings once, Allie scoffed. "He is just pathetic, doing childish things, while you flush every cent into his harmless dreams." I remember saying firmly, "His dreams are not childish," but the echo of the word pathetic still drips poison in my ears. All those memories cascade down me like rain, each a condemnation. I worked 2 jobs, scraping the edge of exhaustion. I borrowed against my pension to pay for Travis's medical bills. I skipped dinners and birthday celebrations to send Allie to better schools. I gave and gave until no part of me remained. And still they spat, "You do too much." It seemed every drop of blood I shed flowed into a bottomless vessel, expecting nothing in return. But here I stand, drained yet unextinguished, a quiet ember refusing to be snuffed out by indifference. The injustice of it nearly broke me, but now it stiffens my spine. They believed I was a resource to exploit, not a person to value. Micah comes into focus, his presence in my mind a beacon. When I awoke earlier and found him bruised for trying to protect me, something shattered in me. In that moment, I knew that not all seeds I sowed had grown ungratefully. Micah stood between me and oblivion out of love, not obligation. I think of how that boy, so gentle he seemed barely living, now stands quietly by my side. And though the others call me casualty, he sees me as a sanctuary. I breathe, struggling to fill my lungs with intention I thought lost. I have given them everything, my youth, my strength, my hope, and they tossed it aside as collateral. But I will not relinquish the last thing of value I have left, the power to live, with dignity, and to honor my own survival. I lay in that hospital bed, breathing shallow, every rib aching but alive and alert. Every day I sensed death ready to reclaim me. The constant beeps and dripping IV bottles were a morbid lullaby. But once I knew I could still think, I realized I still have a weapon, my mind, my will, and the law. When the night was quiet and the nurses made their rounds, I asked for the portable laptop they usually kept locked up. My request came as a tremor, but they delivered it, placing it gently on my bedside table, whispering disbelief. I opened it with blurry vision. I remembered Jerry, my old lawyer friend, who once said, "You write law so you can always get what you deserve." Now I needed that edge. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, stiff and heavy, but I typed. Micah's Light Fund became the repository of everything I had built. Every asset, the modest 3-bedroom house in Hershey, stocks from my secret savings, the tiny cottage in the Pocono Mountains, forgotten paintings from my husband's estate, and yes, the life insurance policy. All to support children who, like Micah, knew what it felt like to stand alone when your own were ready to write you off. Then I inserted the clause no one expected. If Allie Langford or Travis Langford challenge or contest any provision of this will, they forfeit all inheritance and must pay a sum equal to double the total asset value as liquidated damages to the Micah's Light Fund. I felt a flicker, revenge flavored with justice. It had to sound equitable, protective, and actionable. Then I attached it to Jerry's email, encrypted it with his private key, and typed in urgent subject lines. Urgent, do not disclose, I exhaled. I did not tell Allie, I did not tell Travis. Micah sat by my bedside and I caught his eye. He squeezed my hand and I swear I felt the vibration of trust between us. He did not ask questions. He did not say anything. He didn't need to. The next morning, in the ordered bustle of visiting hours, Jerry arrived dressed in gray. I waved him in, just a nod. He pulled out a printed copy of that new will, and our eyes met with mutual resolve. No tears, no sentimentality. Just acknowledgement. The board moved. He stood outside the open curtains and waited. First, Allie entered. She was bright, as always. Carefully coiffed hair, perfect makeup. She stopped when she saw Jerry with the documents. Her smile faltered. "Mom, is this?" Redemption was not coming. Travis followed. His eyes flicked coldly to the envelope. He said nothing, just waited. I realized then the quiet power of law. I was no longer bound by their poison. I had created boundaries, not from hate but from necessity. The moment I felt alive was when I typed that final PDF. "Do it," I told Jerry. He looked at me. "One of us still has enough fight to do this." We signed at the bedside. My shaky signature, his firm one. The nurse in the corner cleared her throat. That afternoon, papers were recorded. The will had legal standing, even if I passed tonight. I lay back and closed my eyes, neutral, calm, still in pain, but armed with certainty. This decision would save Micah, and finally would close the vault on the betrayal. Because what they wanted to kill, the last flicker of my agency, they ignited instead. I can feel Micah's heart next to mine, alive, beating for me. And I will not let that go. I had woken weak, but alive, my spirit still burning somewhere beneath these tubes and monitors, and in that fragile state, I found that justice is not always served in courtrooms, but sometimes at the bedside. This was that moment. Jerry, in his dark suit and composed expression, arrived without fanfare one morning. A nurse peeked her head in, surprised, but he merely nodded. I offered a thin smile. My children, Allie, Travis, Micah, sat huddled nearby. The atmosphere crackled with tension. Allie cleared her throat. She looked flustered, adjusting her manicured nails. "What's this, Mom? Another stunt?" Jerry placed the envelope gently in front of me, sliding open the lock as though it were sacred. He cleared his throat. "This is Etta Langford's final will and testament," he said, voice measured. "Prepared, updated, and signed less than 24 hours ago." My hands shook along the IV drips, but I pressed them together in front of me. My eyes held him for a quiet beat. He continued, "The entirety of her estate, housing, insurance, investments, and private assets, are bequeathed to Micah's Light Fund, a charitable trust established to provide care and support for displaced and orphan children." A gasp echoed off the ICU walls. Allie's face blanched. Travis's fist tightened. Micah looked as if he'd just swallowed cold air whole. I exhaled and delivered my quiet verdict. "I only care about one thing," I whispered, "seeing how that fund's name looks in your eyes." Allie's eyes sparked fire as she cursed softly. "This is insane," she spat. "You can't do this to us. You know we rely on your will." Jerry didn't flinch. He tilted his head, a thin smile. "Mrs. Langford has taken the additional step of filing the official copy with the trust administrator. The bank has it, and so does the court. This document carries legal weight, effective immediately." Travis rose, fury twisting his features. He lunged to tear at the paper's edge, but Jerry held his hand up, calm as a statue. "Be aware, this document is irrevocable. We have copies, witnesses, notarization. Any attempt to contest it would trigger the forfeiture clause and result in financial indictment." Micah's head dropped with relief. Allie sat down, trembling. I lifted my free hand. "I wanted them to see. Look at the document, then look at each other," I said, steadier than I expected. "That fund has more worth than anything you could have inherited. Do you notice how the light catches those words?" A silence, better than any legal argument, followed. Allie sniffed, turned her face away. Travis's eyelids fluttered, shock, realization, maybe for the first time remorse. I let him sit with it. "Why?" Allie muttered. "Because I loved you enough to give," I said. But I need you to value life and kindness more than inheritance. You didn't pick me, but I chose to live, and I chose this path." Micah stepped forward. You're not going anywhere, Grandma. You're not done." I turned my head and saw that his gaze held urgency, not pity. At that moment, the world widened. Jerry closed the envelope. "I will arrange for your legal team to meet hospital administrators, proper protocol." I shook my head. "Keep it in the hospital, let it sit here. Let it be the first thing Allie, Travis, and anyone else who walks in sees each morning." And then I closed my eyes. It was good. Better than medicine or revenge alone. I had reclaimed the narrative of my life, starting from this bed. A lifetime of giving has taught me how to care. Now, a final act of refusal, an unspoken test of values, carried more weight than what lay in any bank vault. And I could rest just a little before making my next move. I recovered slowly. Every day, someone brought me soup or a magazine. I lay cramped in that sterile hospital bed, watching stars drift across ceiling tiles as I waited for the world to show what it was made of. And then it did. The moment the headline hit the morning paper, I felt it in my chest. A spark of vindication, slow and searing. She lived again and left everything to kindness. 4 simple words, printed on page 1 of the local paper and shared across social media feeds by friends and strangers. The headline glowed against the sterile blue of the ICU lights. I heard the nurses whispering in the corridor. One said, "I've never seen someone plan their legacy like that, so carefully, so defiantly." Another added, "She's not dying, she's alive again." Later that day, the local news produced a small segment. I watched from my bed, astonished, as a neighbor, Mrs. Jacobs, from 2 houses down, stood in front of her porch, wrapped in her favorite floral coat. Her voice wavered. Etta was the one bringing chicken soup to all the houses after the flood last year. She didn't need credit, she just did it. Now she gives again, for kids she barely knows. That's who she is. Her tears struck deeper than any legal defense I ever crafted. I lay my head back on the pillow, closing my eyes until I could calm them. Meanwhile, the fallout from my choice was tipping over like a cliff. Friends distanced themselves. Birthday party invites vanished. I learned through gentle comments, "We haven't seen Allie in a while. Travis has been quiet at the family reunions," that my children had become inconvenient shadows. At their workplace, at school, among extended family, murmurs swirled like storm clouds. The caption read, "They took everything for granted and lost what mattered most." One of Allie's friends sent me an apology letter. Every note in that stack wasn't just thanks, it was a confession. People admitted they let me fade in silence until my presence became their mirror. Sometimes it takes a disappearance to show someone how much light they carried all along. "I'm so sorry," she wrote. I told her to stop being dramatic, to relax. Now I wish I said something different. I was blind. Day after day, envelopes filled with stamps, scrawled names in shaky handwriting found their way to my bedside. Hundreds of them, letters signed, a stranger, a single mom, a student, a neighbor. "Thank you for showing me what real generosity is. You taught my son that kindness outlives inheritance. No one makes a stand like that anymore. Thank you for giving us hope." The stack grew beside me, warm stories shimmering beneath dull paper. Each letter was a spark, and soon the room felt full, not of sorrow, but of quiet solidarity. I closed my eyes and let the gratitude wash over me. One morning, Micah arrived with a letter in hand. "I found this in the nurse's station," he said, voice soft. "Someone writes, 'You have a grandmother we all wish we had.'" Tears welled in my eyes, not for me, but for how far love travels when it isn't transactional. I squeezed Micah's shoulder. I whispered, "Let's let kindness be the inheritance," and he nodded. By the end of that week, I was no longer just the old woman in the hospital bed. I became a symbol, quiet strength, integrity, the cost paid to claim one's story back. The community rallied quietly. Donations were made to Micah's Light Fund labeled, "From the families your children will help." And overnight, I understood. There was more power in forgiveness than in bitterness. More power in building than demanding. More power in choosing what the world sees in you than demanding it. I closed my eyes, the hum of the hospital receding. My head fell to the pillow, but my heart soared. The fall of morality around us doesn't start in speeches, it starts in simple, courageous acts. When I finally left the hospital, body weaker, spirit stronger, I stepped into a cold morning that felt like rebirth. I remember the first time they wheeled me into the makeshift ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Micah's Light Fund. The air smelled of fresh paint and hopeful beginnings. I see the polished sign now. Micah's Light Fund, in loving memory of generations of children waiting to be seen. Years of systematic indifference welded into that single act of faith. We opened the doors wide, children who had been shuffled from foster home to group home, grandchildren of grandparents who had no one to walk through life with. On the steps, I stood shaky from years of bed rest, but unbroken. My voice echoed across the lawn. I did not leave my legacy to those who bear my name, but to those who bear integrity and compassion in their souls. Silence followed my words. Then children, smiling children, broke it. One little girl ran up, eyes too big for her face, and shouted, "Grandma Etta!" I laughed for the first time that year. It was not pity that bloomed, but wild, raw tenderness. We served oatmeal and fruit. Volunteers handed out books and blankets. I watched Micah lead a shy 10-year-old by the hand and whisper, "It's going to be okay." My heart swelled. This was the institution I dreamed of. Small acts of kindness coalescing into something bigger than bitterness. Spanning the garden, neighbors arrived, parents, teachers, folks who'd once watched my suffering from behind drawn curtains. One older woman handed me a quilt. "My mother sewed this," she said quietly. "Thought you'd need it." I held the quilt as though holding history. Kindness passed hand to hand, generation to generation. Micah climbed onto stage. His voice cracked slightly when he said, "Thank you for believing in me when they didn't. I promise to pass it forward." He was soft, gentle. Robbing this moment of self-pity, he turned it into promise. I had never been rich, never built empires or shore up legacies, but in that moment, I felt wealthier than kings. When someone later asked me why I gave everything away, I said, "I do not leave a legacy to those by blood, because blood doesn't guarantee love. I leave it to those with compassion. That is the only inheritance that matters." And in that moment, I understood something deeper than anger or forgiveness. I had not just rewritten a will, I had rewritten the terms of love itself. No longer would my worth be tethered to shared DNA or holiday gatherings. My value lived in the soft hands of children I might never meet, in futures I'd never see. When the world looks back on my name, I don't want them to say I was a mother or a widow or even a survivor. I want them to say, "She saw what others threw away and called it treasure." That, to me, is real wealth. A legacy is not built in silence or submission. It is carved, fiercely, out of the places where others told you you were nothing. A volunteer, holding a child's drawing that read "Kindness Heals," looked at me with tears and said, "You have taught an entire town what matters." At sunset, Micah found me by the garden roses. He had changed, taller, steadier, eyes full of something we both lost, then found again. "Are you proud of us?" he asked. I nodded and pressed a kiss to his head. More than anything. He smiled, careful and brave. And in that soft frame of dusk, I realized that although betrayal may break hearts, legacy rebuilds souls. This is where I anchor my peace. The will, the trust, the fund, they are not the story. The children laughing on the lawn, the quilt on my shoulders, Micah's steady hand waiting to pass it on. That is my legacy. I stood at the doorway of the renovated community room, my hands steady on Micah's shoulders. He was taller now, arms long, voice measured. The boy who once trembled by my bedside had grown into something bigger. Not strong in muscle, but in spirit. Earlier that day, the committee had gathered to finalize monthly disbursements from Micah's Light Fund. Teachers, social workers, even a few of Micah's old classmates now helping vet applications, all aligned with a simple mission: let kindness break cycles where bloodlines could not. As I looked around the room, I realized something profound. My legacy was not an inheritance. They were it. Micah pulled me aside. His eyes glistened, but his voice stayed poised. "Grandma, I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to protect you. he whispered. I turned to him, smiling with the warmth of everything I had held back. I tapped his chest gently. As long as you're not indifferent, you are stronger than very many who claim courage, I said. He nodded, a little stiffly, but his gaze was steady. I saw tears gather, but they didn't fear the sunbeam flaring through the window. I led him to the office corner where an old record player stood. I hadn't used it in years, but tonight it seemed perfect. I placed a needle on a worn vinyl. The soft crackle gave way to a song I once danced to at home, a lifetime ago. A slow, gentle waltz that smelled like joy. Micah and I rebounded through that gentle melody like ghosts in a memory. I rested my head against his chest, and he placed his hand over mine. The song swelled, and, for a moment, there was nothing but healing. A grandmother, her child, bound not by blood, but by love running deeper than pain. Thank you, he said. I kissed his forehead. Thank you for reminding me that the future can be kind. Later I watched Micah greet teenagers visiting for workshops, giving them art kits, sharing stories, encouraging them not to wait for permission to dream. I thought of my own youth, struggling to be seen. And here was my legacy, living proof that seeing can start with one person's kindness. Neighbors stopped by, saying things like, "The boy you rescued, he's rescuing others now." And, outside, community leaders quietly offered space and funding for the scholarship fund. A local journalist called it not just a scholarship, but a campfire for souls who felt cold and forgotten. Yet Allie and Travis were still nowhere in sight. I had no regrets. Serenity didn't demand reunion. Once I might have craved an apology. Now I realized peace is more precious than reconciliation. If they returned in the silence of regret, that might be enough. But I did not wait. Instead, I focused on Micah, on these young faces, on the quiet miracles in their laughter. One afternoon, I found a bundle of letters from recipients of scholarships, thousands of words in return, thank you notes, drawings, poems. Some said simply, "Grandma Etta, you showed me love isn't a transaction." Tears came, but silently. I wiped them away with the joy of survival. That night, Micah came in. He handed me a small wooden plaque carved with a twisted heart wrapped around an open hand. On it, "Legacy is love given, not inherited." I pressed a trembling finger to the engraving. "You made this?" He nodded. I hugged him. "This is the best piece of art I ever received." When the day ended, I walked outside into dusk, blossoms lit by golden street lamps. Micah walked behind me. My legs were weak, but my spirit was not. He offered his arm. I took it. "Let's go home, Grandma," he said. I smiled. "Lead the way, child of my heart." We walked together, grandmother and grandson, under the promise of peace. When Micah helped me into the old sedan and drove me back to the garden house, every inch of me ached, but my heart was whole. The dirt roads curved through ancient oaks, arcing like silent sentinels guarding memory. As we pulled up under the dusty porch and he helped me climb the steps, a soft breeze carried the scent of late summer blooms and old wood smoke. I stood on the porch, looking over the garden I had neglected too long. Wild iris and foxglove tangled in harmony, and rose bushes, once trimmed by my own hands, stood tall, petals looping toward the sky. My vision blurred, not with tears, but with calm. Micah's hand was steady on my shoulder. "Mom," he whispered. I touched his wrist gently. "No more Mom, dear boy," I said, a half-smile forming. "Just Etta." I shuffled inside, the wooden floor groaning in welcome beneath my feet. I sank into my favorite armchair, worn, cozy, and dusted with old sunlight. Micah closed the door quietly and handed me a pot of tea. Together we sipped in comfortable silence. Outside, evening settled over the garden. Crickets hummed, the sky eased into lavender. Late that night, I stepped onto the porch and looked at the gate for the first time. I had not even unlocked it. Standing before me was a sign, neat block letters that bore no hint of aggression, only boundary. No trespassing. Family or not. There was no bitterness in it. It was simply the truth. Allie and Travis had stood outside, staring at that sign, not with sadness but with a wordless admission of what they had lost. I closed my eyes, leaning back with my hand gently placed over my chest, feeling the thrum of a heart reborn. I thought, I once lived for the blood that tied me to them. Now I live for what is right. And in that moment I knew I had regained myself. Day after day, the rhythms of peace deepened. I wrenched weeds at dawn, planting seeds with plaque-labeled kindness and courage. I brewed tea with the kettle that smelled of old laughs, and on quiet mornings I read letters from strangers, handwritten art, poems, and gratitude. Micah would come in with sketches for the fund's annual event, colorful murals, smiling children, and firm hope. I placed them on the mantel. "The board meeting is tomorrow," he'd say. I nodded. Board meetings. This was the world I fought to rejoin on my own terms. One late afternoon, Micah rushed in. He carried a framed quote, "Blood doesn't guarantee love. Actions prove it." We hung it above the fireplace. He stepped back and helped me to my feet. "You did good," he said. Tears glistened as I held him. His voice, the boy who still called me Grandma, had become the foundation of our story. Not inheritance, but meaning. We watched flickering candles cast shadows on the walls, and I thought, this is victory, quiet as dusk, but stronger than any roar. And when I finally gather my strength to leave this chair for good, it will be without regret. The sheriff might deliver a final notice, or a reporter might ask to re-age yellowing headlines, but I will smile, clutch a rose from the garden, and say simply, I lived, for love that wasn't mine by blood, but greater by choice. And the world will echo back, not with applause, but with the steady hum of goodness carried on. I remember the day Rita called me to say, "Grandma, I'm going into labor." My voice cracked in the phone, breath catching like the first gust of spring wind. All the weeks of waiting, those quiet afternoons and hushed prayers, culminated in that small, trembling phrase. When the door creaked open, I stood before a woman transformed by new life. Rita's hair was tangled, eyes shining with both exhaustion and light, and in her arms lay our great-grandson for the first time. I knelt. My hands trembled as I reached toward him. He smelled like fresh straw, like a soft promise. In her moment of triumph and fatigue, Rita's tears dripped onto her gown, and I knew all the prayers, all the struggles, the whole story of our family had led here. When she gently lifted his head and placed him in my arms, I closed my eyes. I held him close, breathing in his stillness. My heart, once fragile and broken, felt rooted in something enduring. He stirred, tiny fingers curling around mine, and my voice lost itself in a whisper. "Welcome, little light." I rocked him gently. Everything else, the bitterness, the battles, the trust betrayed, faded away. All that remained was this small miracle, who didn't even know he existed until a breath ago. That night, after Rita and her husband sat beside me quietly in the lampless room, we shared stories. I told her how Micah, as a boy, used to draw stars to understand where kindness lived. She watched me carefully, tears in her eyes. "I hoped he'd grow up to change the world," I said, "but I never imagined he'd give me this." I nodded toward the cradle. Rita smiled, placing her hand softly on her son's back. "You did it, Grandma. You made him who he is." I sighed deeply. The years of struggle, sacrifice, legal battles, and mercy had come full circle to a cradle and a promise. Weeks passed, and the garden house welcomed another new routine. I sat nursing the baby in my lap one afternoon. He drifted in my arms, breath warm and even, wrapped in a blue blanket. I stood by the window, sunlight kissing both of us. The baby cooed, and I felt tear-wet warmth flood me again, not sorrow, but fulfillment. This tiny new life was different from conquering estates or winning battles. He represented what matters most: unconditional presence, joy, and simple, unearned love. When he slept and his breath grew quiet, Rita watched me study him like a prayer. She leaned in, my daughter-in-law, once an unfamiliar face, now a cherished presence. She whispered, "He's beautiful, thank you." I kissed her forehead. "Thank you, child. You and Micah made my story complete." In the evenings, Micah would come in and find me holding the baby. I passed him into Micah's arms. I watched his strong yet gentle hands cradle his son, sensibility, tenderness, pride. "I'm scared of messing up," he whispered. I touched his cheek. "You won't. The best part, son, is that you already know how to love. That's enough." Rita stood close by, eyes brimming with my gratitude. I realized we were no longer fractured by law or tragedy. We were united by lineage, made sacred by love. When I hold my great-grandson now, I feel the pulse of generations in my arms. My death would no longer be the end of a bitter story. It would be the moment of passing a torch, of hope blooming from ruins. Micah and Rita mounted the final touches on the scholarship fund, the anniversary coming soon. They named a category after him, the New Light Scholarship, dedicated to families connected by kindness, not bloodline. I hovered nearby, content to watch them lead. My heart, once bent from betrayal, was finally whole again. One evening, with the baby sleeping upstairs, I rested my head against the wooden frame of the porch. The cicadas played their dusk hymn. I cradled Rita's letter, detailing every first milestone, first cry, first breath, first smile. I closed my eyes. I had once believed legacy meant what you left behind, but now I know it's what you helped begin. I thought I lived for blood. Now I live for the life I gave back, for this child, for a future worth building, and in that quiet it sufficed. And that's how I learned sometimes. The family that saves you isn't the one that shares your blood, but the one that shows up when your breath is weak and your will is even weaker. I didn't just survive that hospital room. I survived betrayal. I survived silence. And I came back not for revenge, but for redemption. If my story reminded you of someone you know, or if you've ever felt discarded, overlooked, or underestimated, know this: your worth is not defined by who leaves you. It's defined by what you choose to leave behind. And if you are holding on by a thread right now, whether from betrayal, loneliness, or the ache of being forgotten, remember this: your breath still matters. Your story still matters. Sometimes it is not the big gestures, but the quiet endurance that marks your place in the world. You do not need a grand finale to be seen. You only need the courage to keep standing. I learned that even when your hands are empty, your heart can still give. And when everything else is stripped away, love, unconditional, unapologetic love, will always be enough to begin again. Thank you for listening to my story. Share this with someone who needs hope. And don't forget to subscribe to Grandma True Stories, where every wrinkle holds a truth and every scar a survival. Until next time, stay kind, stay brave, stay true.